The old woman was pouring water when Camilla Sherwin decided she had had enough of being made to wait for her own wedding dinner. "You there?" Camilla did not look up from her plate. The soup was cold and the fish was worse, and I begin to wonder whether anyone in this house has the least notion how a duchess's table is meant to be run. Are you deaf as well as slow? The room had perhaps 30 people in it, family and neighbours gathered to welcome the new Duchess of Thornhaven to her husband's seat. And every one of them went still in the particular way a room goes still when it has just watched something happen that cannot be unhappened. The old woman set down the water jug with perfect steadiness. She was perhaps 60, small and straight-backed, in grey silk of excellent cut that Camilla had not troubled to look at closely enough to notice was silk at all. And she said, mildly, "I am neither, madam, though I confess my hearing for insolence has never been sharp. I find I have to be told a thing twice before I quite believe someone has said it. I was not aware the servants here were permitted to answer back." "No," agreed the old woman. "I don't imagine you were." Edmund Calloway, 9th Duke of Thornhaven, rose from his chair at the head of the table with a sound that cut through the room more completely than any raised voice could have done, the scrape of oak on stone, deliberate, unhurried. "Camilla," he said, "allow me to complete the introduction I believe was neglected this afternoon in all the business of your arrival. This is my mother, Margaret Calloway, Dowager Duchess of Thornhaven." The silence that followed had a physical weight to it. Camilla Sherwin, 3 days a bride, sat very still with her wine-glass halfway to her lips and watched the whole of the table, her own mother included, 2 seats down, gone the colour of the tablecloth, understand exactly what she had just done. She had married a stranger 9 days before, which was not, in the world Camilla Sherwin had grown up in, a remarkable thing. Her father was Josiah Sherwin of Sherwin's Bank, Lombard Street, a man who had built a fortune in 20 years out of nothing but nerve and other men's desperation, and who had wanted, for the whole of Camilla's life, exactly one thing he could not simply purchase: a title in the family. He had tried twice with elder daughters, both matches collapsing when the prospective husbands' families discovered precisely how new the Sherwin money was. He had not intended to fail a third time. Camilla did not know the particulars of how her father had secured the Duke of Thornhaven. She had asked, once, in the spring, and her father had said only that Thornhaven's father had left debts that certain persons were prepared to be patient about, provided the young Duke saw reason, and that she was not to trouble her head over the mechanism of it, only to be ready to marry by midsummer. She had been ready. She had also been, if she was honest with herself, in the very small hours when honesty could not be avoided, considerably more frightened than ready, because the Duke of Thornhaven had called upon her exactly 4 times before the wedding, had said perhaps 200 words to her in total, and had looked at her, each time, with the particular courtesy of a man paying a debt he resents and is too well bred to mention. She had covered the fear the only way she knew how, which was with her chin up and her voice sharp, because her father had taught all 3 of his daughters that the world would eat a Sherwin girl alive the moment it smelled uncertainty, and Camilla had believed him utterly, and had walked into Thornhaven Hall 3 days before, determined to be mistress of it, before anyone could suggest she was not equal to the position. She had not, in 3 days, troubled to learn a single servant's name. She had not asked who the small grey silk woman was who sat so often in the morning room with her needlework, who had smiled at Camilla twice in passing and been met with the barest inclination of the head. She had assumed. It had not occurred to her that a woman who did not announce her rank might simply not need to. "I did not know," Camilla said into the ringing quiet. "No," said the Dowager Duchess. "I gathered as much. Your Grace, You need not finish that sentence at this table, in front of 30 people, because whatever you say now will be repeated in every drawing room in the county, by Thursday, regardless of how carefully you choose the words. And I find I would rather you had a night to think before you speak again. The dowager's voice was entirely level, entirely without heat, which somehow made it considerably worse than fury would have. Edmund, I believe I shall retire. Do finish your dinner. She rose, and the whole table rose with her, the scrape of 30 chairs, and she walked the length of the room with her back straight and her chin level, exactly as she had walked in with the water jug, and the door closed behind her with no sound at all. Camilla Sherwin sat at the foot of her own wedding table and discovered that every eye in the room that was not looking at her plate was looking at her husband, waiting to see what he would do. He did not shout. She would learn, over the following days, that he never did. He came to her rooms an hour after the guests had gone, and he stood by the cold hearth with his hands behind his back, and he said, I am not going to pretend this can be mended by morning, because it cannot, and I think you know that as well as I do. I have already said I am sorry. You have said it to me. You have not said it to her. He looked at her directly, and there was nothing in his face she could read at all, which frightened her more than anger would have. I did not choose this marriage, Camilla. I will not pretend otherwise to you now, of all moments, when pretending has already cost us both a great deal. Your father held a note against my father's debts that would have put my mother out of the only home she has known for 40 years, and I married you to keep a roof over her head, and I have been trying, these 9 days, to discover whether there was anything in the arrangement I might come to value beyond the arithmetic of it. And now I have watched you speak to the one person in this world I have spent my whole life trying to protect, as though she were beneath your notice, in a room full of witnesses, without the smallest hesitation, said the Duke of Thornhaven. I am not asking you to explain it. I am asking you to understand that I noticed, and that I am not able to unnotice it, and that whatever this marriage becomes now, it begins from here, and not from before. He left her alone with that, and Camilla Sherwin sat up long into the night, discovering, for the first time in 23 years, what it felt like to have genuinely, irreparably erred. It was Eleanor Marsh who found the Dowager Duchess 2 mornings later, sitting alone in the walled garden with a letter unopened in her lap and an expression Eleanor had not seen on that composed face in the 4 years she had lived at Thornhaven as poor relation, companion, and, though no one used the word, the nearest thing to a daughter the old woman had. You are not reading it, Eleanor said, settling on the bench without being invited, because 4 years had earned her that much familiarity. I have read it twice already. It is from my sister in Bath, and it says nothing of the smallest consequence, and I find I cannot make myself read it a 3rd time. The Dowager set it aside. I am not distressed on my own account, Eleanor. Whatever the household believes, I have been called worse things by better people. I am distressed because my son has married a woman who did not think to ask a single servant's name in 3 days, and I do not know how a marriage recovers from a bride who has not yet learned to see the people around her. She apologized to Edmund, not to me. Eleanor Marsh was quiet a moment, turning that over. She was 26, plain in the unremarkable way that made rooms forget she was in them, and she had come to Thornhaven at 19, when her own father's small estate in Shropshire had gone to a cousin under an entail that left nothing at all for daughters, and the old Duchess, the Dowager now, but simply the Duchess then, before Edmund's father died, had taken her in without ceremony, and without ever once making her feel the charity of it. Eleanor read to her in the evenings. She managed the still room and half the household accounts quietly, because the housekeeper's arithmetic had never been strong, and no one had thought to mention it aloud. She had loved that woman, without reservation, for 7 years, in the particular fierce way of someone who has been given a home after believing she would never have one again. I think, Eleanor said slowly, "that she does not yet know how. Being sorry to a room is easy, ma'am. Being sorry to a person requires knowing who the person is, and I do not believe anyone has ever required Camilla Sherwin to know that about anyone at all. You defend her very readily, for a woman she has not troubled to learn the name of. I defend her because I watched her face while you walked out of that room, ma'am, and it was not the face of a woman who felt she had won a point. It was the face of a woman who had just discovered the floor was not where she believed it to be." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "I am not asking you to forgive her. I am only telling you what I saw, because I think you would rather have the whole picture than the easier half of it." The Dowager Duchess turned to look at her properly then, the way she did when something had genuinely caught her attention rather than merely passed near it. "You have grown very fair-minded in your old age, Eleanor." "I have had a very fair-minded example in front of me for 7 years, ma'am. I could hardly have avoided it." Eleanor smiled faintly, for the first time that morning. "Besides, I find I would rather this house mend than remain broken for the satisfaction of being right about who broke it." The mending, such as it was, began in earnest a week later, in the still room, of all unlikely places. Camilla had taken to wandering the house in the mornings, not from idleness, though the household did not yet know what else to call it, but because she had discovered, in the week since the dinner, that she did not actually know where anything in her own home was kept, or by whom, or why, and the not knowing had begun to gnaw at her in a way she had not expected. She found Eleanor there among the jars and the dried lavender, checking a ledger against a shelf of preserves, with the quiet competence of someone who had done the task 100 times before. "You keep the household accounts," Camilla said. It was not quite a question. Some of them. The housekeeper's arithmetic has never been strong, and no one thought it kind to mention it to her directly, so I have quietly corrected her columns for 6 years instead. Eleanor did not look up from the ledger. "I do not say that to invite your pity, Your Grace. I say it because you asked, and I have found that most people at Thornhaven have simply stopped asking me anything at all, having decided long ago that I am furniture that occasionally speaks." Camilla stood in the doorway a long moment, absorbing that. "I have done the same thing to you that I did to the Dowager," she said slowly. "I have been in this house a fortnight, and I could not have told you your own surname until this morning." "No," Eleanor agreed, "you could not have. I am sorry for it. You may show me you are sorry for it a great deal more usefully than by saying so, Your Grace, if you are willing." Eleanor finally looked up, and there was nothing unkind in her face, only a very plain sort of patience. "I could use a second pair of hands with these preserves before the frost, if you have nothing more pressing than being stared at by the household." Camilla Sherwin, Duchess of Thornhaven, rolled up her sleeves in a still room for the first time in her life, and stayed the whole of that morning, and came back the next. The trouble that came for Thornhaven that autumn did not come from Camilla, though it very nearly finished what Camilla's carelessness had begun. It came from her father. Josiah Sherwin had not built a fortune on Lombard Street by leaving matters to chance, and he had not spent 2 years engineering his daughter's marriage into a dukedom merely to see her installed as mistress of a fine house. He had married Camilla to Thornhaven because a duke's name opened doors that a banker's money, however considerable, could not, doors to the sort of investors who would not touch Sherwin's bank directly, but would touch anything with a duke's signature attached to it, and Josiah Sherwin's bank, though no one outside a very small circle yet knew it, was considerably less sound than its handsome premises suggested. He came to Thornhaven in September with a proposal dressed as a courtesy call, that the Duke lend his name and signature to a new venture, a canal scheme in the Midlands, as a director, requiring no capital and no labour beyond the use of his title on the prospectus, for which service Sherwin's bank would naturally be most grateful in the matter of certain outstanding notes. Edmund declined politely, and Josiah Sherwin's civility did not so much as flicker, which told Eleanor Marsh, Watching from the corner of the library, where she had been fetching a book, and had not yet managed to leave, everything she needed to know about how dangerous a man he actually was. "You will forgive me, Your Grace, if I observe that your late father's debts to my house have not entirely vanished, simply because a wedding has taken place," Sherwin said, still smiling. "The marriage settlement discharged the principal. It did not discharge every note I hold, and I confess I had rather hoped a family connection might smooth what remains, in the ordinary way that families do smooth such things for one another." "What remains, Mr. Sherwin?" "A trifling sum, 11,000 perhaps, across various instruments. I had not meant to raise it so soon after the wedding. It seemed indelicate, but you have rather forced my hand by declining the canal, and I find indelicacy is sometimes the only honest course available to a man of business," Eleanor told the Dowager Duchess that same afternoon, because she had learned in 7 years at Thornhaven that the old woman's counsel, however quietly given, was worth more than any solicitor's. "He is squeezing him," the Dowager said, when Eleanor had finished. "First the marriage, and now this. He means to use Edmund's name to prop up whatever is failing at that bank, and he has £11,000 of leverage to make certain Edmund cannot simply refuse him a second time. Can the Duke not simply pay the note and be done with it? £11,000 on top of a marriage settlement already stretched thin, repairing 4 years of his father's mismanagement. No, my dear, he cannot." The Dowager was quiet a moment, her hands folded, her eyes on the middle distance in the way Eleanor had come to recognise as thinking rather than resting. "But a note is a piece of paper, and paper can be examined, and Josiah Sherwin did not get where he is by keeping honest books for men he intends to squeeze. I should like to know exactly what those instruments say, and whether they say what he claims they say, before my son signs his name to anything else." It was Camilla, in the end, who found the way in, which surprised everyone at Thornhaven considerably, and surprised no one more than Camilla herself. She had spent the 6 weeks since the dinner in a state she did not entirely have words for, watching mostly, and saying very little, because she had discovered that the household she had walked into so confidently 3 days a bride had an entire structure of relationships and history she knew nothing about, and that every time she opened her mouth without first understanding that structure, she said something that revealed precisely how little she understood. She had gone, twice, to the Dowager's rooms, and been received both times with perfect unbending courtesy that was worse than a slammed door because it left her nothing to push against. But she had grown up in her father's counting house before he grew grand enough to keep her from it, and she knew, in a way that Eleanor Marsh and even the Dowager Duchess did not, exactly how her father's business actually worked, because she had spent childhood afternoons sorting his correspondence for pocket money before he decided such things were beneath the future Duchess, and she remembered the particular shape of his handwriting when he was inflating a sum, and the particular clerk, a nervous man named Price, who copied out the fair instruments from her father's rougher drafts. She came to Edmund's study on a wet October evening with a request that startled him considerably. "I should like to see the notes Mr. Sherwin claims against you," she said. "Not because I doubt your judgment, Your Grace, because I doubt my father's arithmetic, and I have better reason than anyone in this house to doubt it accurately." The notes, when Sherwin's solicitor reluctantly produced copies under pressure of the Duke's own lawyer, told an interesting story to anyone who knew how to read the interest calculations properly. And Camilla, sitting at the long table in the estate office with the Dowager Duchess on one side and Eleanor Marsh on the other, an alliance none of the 3 of them could have predicted a month before. Read them very carefully indeed. Here, she set her finger on a column of figures. "This note is dated 18 months before my grandfather-in-law's death, at 4%, which was the standard rate my father charged in that year to every ordinary client. But it has been recalculated here. In a different hand, Price's hand, I would know it anywhere. He has a particular slant to his sevens, at 6% compounded quarterly rather than 4 simple. And the difference between those two calculations across 18 months is not trifling at all. It is closer to £2,000 that should never have accrued. You are saying your father forged the interest. I am saying my father instructed a frightened clerk to recalculate a note after the fact, in a manner that would not survive one honest hour with an actuary, said Camilla. And I am saying it in this room. To both of you, because I have spent 6 weeks discovering that I married into a family I very nearly destroyed my first evening in it, and I find I would rather be useful than sorry for the rest of my natural life. The Dowager Duchess looked at her for a long moment. That is the first time, she said slowly, that you have said anything in my hearing that was not about yourself. Camilla did not flinch from it, which the old woman noted and approved of, though she said nothing further that evening. Edmund, who had said nothing at all through the whole exchange, sat back in his chair and looked at his wife as though seeing her for the first time in the daylight, rather than across a candle-lit table full of strangers. You have known this for how long? 3 days. I did not come to you the moment I suspected it, because I wanted to be certain before I accused my own father of fraud in front of his son-in-law. Camilla met his eyes squarely. I am not telling you this to earn anything back, Your Grace. I am telling you because it is true, and because I have decided that being useful to this family, however belatedly, matters more to me than being comfortable in my father's good opinion. It matters to me a great deal more than you appear to credit, Edmund said quietly, and I find I have been unfair to you these 6 weeks, watching for the next unkindness and missing, rather thoroughly, the considerable work you have been doing in the meantime to become someone who would not commit it again. She went to Eleanor that night, unable to sleep, and found her in the small sitting room with a lamp and a book she was not reading either. You must think me a monster, Camilla said, without preamble. I think you were unkind to a woman you did not know, in a house you had been in for 3 days, at a dinner you did not ask to have. Eleanor said, not looking up. I do not think that makes you a monster. I think it makes you someone who has never had to consider that the people around a room might matter as much as the people at its head, and I think that is a common enough failing among people raised the way you were raised. And I think you are the first person I have met who was raised that way and troubled to notice it in yourself, before the age of 40. You are kinder to me than I deserve. I am not being kind. I am telling you the truth, which I have found is a thing people mistake for kindness, only because so few of them trouble to offer it. Eleanor set down her book at last. I loved that woman before you ever walked through the door, Camilla. I have loved her 7 years, since she took me in with nothing to recommend me but an entailed-out father and a face nobody remembers. I will not pretend your first evening here cost me nothing to forgive, but you have spent 6 weeks trying to earn it back with actions instead of apologies, and actions are the only currency I have ever trusted. Josiah Sherwin came to Thornhaven a second time in November, expecting a signature, and found instead the Dowager Duchess, the Duke, and his own daughter waiting for him in the estate office with the recalculated notes spread across the table. You will forgive us the ambush, Mr. Sherwin, said Edmund, but I find I have grown considerably less patient with courtesy calls since the last one. Sherwin's eyes went to the papers, and then to his daughter, and something in his face closed like a door. Camilla, whatever you believe you have found, I have found Price's hand recalculating a 4% simple note into 6% compound 18 months after it was drawn, Papa. I have found it on 3 separate instruments, and I have written to Mr. Price myself, and he has written back, and I have that letter as well. Camilla's voice did not shake, though her hands, folded tightly in her lap, betrayed what it cost her. You are not owed £11,000. By my own reckoning, done twice and checked by the Duke's own man of business, you are owed something closer to 6. And I imagine when the Bank of England's examiners finish the inquiry into Sherwin's solvency, that I understand is already quietly underway. £6,000 honestly collected will matter to you a very great deal more than 11,000 collected by fraud and then discovered as such in open court. You would ruin your own father. I would stop my own father from ruining a family that has been nothing but patient with the both of us, said Camilla Sherwin. And I would remind you, Papa, that you taught me arithmetic before you taught me manners. And it turns out the arithmetic was the more useful lesson. Sherwin did not go to court because court was the one thing he could least afford with the Bank of England already circling, and he settled the true £6,000 within the month, in cash, without another word about canals or directorships. Sherwin's bank failed the following spring, regardless. Quietly, the way such things failed when the principals had time to arrange their own affairs first. And Josiah Sherwin retired to a modest house in Bath and was not received in any drawing room that mattered again, though his daughter, who by then bore a different name entirely in the county's regard, sent him an allowance every quarter without fail, because she had decided, she told Eleanor once, that being right about her father's dishonesty did not require her to stop being his daughter. The Dowager Duchess found Camilla in the walled garden on a cold, bright morning in December, on the very bench where Eleanor had found her weeping in October, and sat down beside her without being invited, which Camilla understood by then to be a considerable honour. I owe you an apology, Camilla said. I have owed it since August, and I have been a coward about the paying of it, because I did not know how to say it to your face without it sounding like the very performance I gave that night, only in reverse. Then do not perform it, say the plain thing. I looked at you and saw a servant because I had been taught my whole life to look at rooms and sort the people in them by what they could do for me or against me. And a woman pouring water registered as neither, and so I did not trouble to see her at all. Camilla's voice was steady, which cost her visibly. I am sorry for the unkindness. I am sorrier still for the seeing that made the unkindness possible, because the unkindness I might unlearn in a season. I do not know how long it will take me to unlearn the seeing. The Dowager Duchess was quiet, a long moment, watching the frost on the dead roses. My husband taught me, when I was younger than you are now, that a woman who has been made to feel small will very often make someone else feel small in turn. Simply to remember what it is to stand above someone for once, she said. I do not say that to excuse you. I say it because I have watched you these 4 months, and I do not think you are cruel, Camilla. I think you are frightened and taught wrong. And I think the woman who spent 6 weeks unravelling her own father's fraud to protect a family that owed her nothing is considerably more interesting to me than the girl who insulted my water jug. She reached over and, for the first time, took Camilla's hand. I accept your apology. I would like, now, to begin again. Not as Duchess and Dowager, which is a relationship built on rank, but as the two women who love the same difficult, decent man, which is a relationship built on rather more. Edmund found them there an hour later, still talking, and stood in the garden doorway a long moment before either of them noticed him, watching his mother and his wife with their heads bent together over something that made his mother laugh, properly, for the first time since August. He had married Camilla Sherwin to save his mother's home, and had spent the autumn believing he had traded one debt for another, a note discharged for a marriage he could not yet call anything warmer than tolerable. He had not expected, watching the two of them now, to feel the particular loosening in his chest that told him the arithmetic of the thing had quietly, without his noticing the exact moment, stopped being arithmetic at all. You are staring, Camilla said, without turning round. I am allowed to stare at my own wife in my own garden. You are allowed, Camilla agreed, though I confess I have not given you much cause to want to, these 4 months. You have given me cause enough, said Edmund, coming to sit on the bench's other side, so that his mother sat between them and did not seem to mind it in the least. To have watched a woman who insulted my mother at her own welcome dinner spend a season learning to see the people around her properly, at real cost to herself and her own father, and I find that is not nothing, Camilla. I find, in fact, that it is very nearly everything. They held a second dinner that Christmas, smaller, quieter, the whole household invited to sit at table rather than serve it. An idea that had been Camilla's, argued for against considerable resistance from a housekeeper who found the whole notion faintly scandalous, and won in the end because the Dowager Duchess had simply said, at the crucial moment, "I think it an excellent idea, and I should like my water poured by whoever happens to be nearest the jug." Eleanor Marsh sat at that table as family rather than companion, for the first time in 7 years, at Camilla's particular insistence. "You did more to save this house than I did," Camilla told her, when Eleanor tried to demur. "You have been loving that woman properly for 7 years while I was busy insulting her over soup. I have learned everything I know about being useful in this family from watching you be it, quietly, and I will not sit at the head of a table that does not have you properly seated at it." The following spring, the walled garden bloomed in every bed at once, and the Dowager Duchess took to sitting in it most afternoons with her granddaughter, Camilla and Edmund's first child. A girl born in March, and named, at Camilla's insistence, and over her husband's mild protest that it was perhaps too plain a name for a duke's daughter, Margaret. "Sherwin writes from Bath," Edmund said, joining his mother on the bench, one warm afternoon, the post still in his hand. "He asks after the child. I confess I find myself less unwilling to answer him than I once was. Camilla sends him a photograph every quarter, along with the allowance," the Dowager said. "I have seen them. He keeps them in a frame, apparently, though God knows what he tells his Bath neighbours about a duke's daughter appearing in his parlour." She smiled faintly, at the baby asleep in the basket beside her. "People change, Edmund, when someone finally troubles to require it of them properly. I did not think, in August, that I would live to say such a thing about the woman who insulted my water jug. I find I am rather glad to have been wrong." "Do you regret marrying me to her father?"